Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine war news update. Actually, I've done a breaking news update already, partly to give you an indication that this hits and losses video would be live. And it's possibly the first time I've done a live hits and losses. Maybe not, but I don't usually do this because I have quite a format or a protocol of what I do. And that first hits and losses video is a super important one to get out, not so much for me, but for you people that often wait upon that. And it's kind of your coffee that you take in the morning or whatever. And I need to make sure that I try and get out in a timely fashion. And now I'm changing it up today. It's New Year's Eve, but this is primarily because there is so much to talk about. So last night was a very, very busy night. I'm going to give you some preamble before getting into the details of what was taking place, partly to give people a bit of a chance to get here live as well. So I went out for a curry last night with some friends that I used to coach my son's rugby club with, and I was talking about, I'm really lucky because I mean this is my job, this is what I do. On a daily basis, every day. I haven't had a day off now for 3 years, literally Christmas Day, all days of my holidays, everything, 7 days a week. And I'm one of the lucky few, I guess, who get to do what they love doing. Not that I love the fact there's a war. That's horrific and I'd like it to stop. But for me, I'm drawn to talk about this, like I've told you a million times, for moral reasons, for reasons of it mattering, hopefully somewhat objectively to people out there, but also very much for myself. This matters. This subject matter matters. It's meaningful. It's important. It's one of the most important things in the world, if not the most. I think this, underwritten by issues of disinformation, is the top, should be the top of everyone's agenda. Sadly, it isn't always the case, but for me, I'm really lucky. And I was talking last night to my friend about how, I'm lucky because what I love doing aligns with what I do. And sometimes I worry that there are days where I'm tired. I have multiple sclerosis and fatigue gets the most of me. And I might struggle with words, but I do worry that they'll get to be a day where I'm like, oh, I really don't want to do this. I can't be bothered. I just want to relax and do other things. But I haven't really had that yet. And then I get days like today where I'm just like, I set a live stream up to speak to you guys. And like for half an hour, I'm like, I want to start it now. I want to start it now. I've got stuff to talk about. And I'm excited to talk about this, not only because predominantly there's some good news for Ukraine, and that's always a strong motivator for me, but also because there's just so many juicy topics to talk about, and I love talking about that, and hopefully it is also mattering to you guys and useful. It has utility. So last night was a good night for the Ukrainians, and I think there are some broader discussions we can have about the individual things that happened last night in terms of where does the war go, where we're at the moment, what are the good things that we can look forward to with regard to Ukraine, what are the challenges. And we're actually going to end up with one of the big challenges because there's a fascinating New York Times article that's just come out talking about Donald Trump and Keith Kellogg, and actually then we've got a message from the State Department to Russia wishing them very happy New Year and blah blah blah. And it just looks like, again, it looks like the United States has just changed sides, and that Trump is just fully on the wrong side, and it is deeply concerning. So there's your concern at the end of the video, but we have lots of potential for being hopeful for the next year earlier on in the video, so that will hopefully give you some moral and political buoyancy to begin with. Anyway, as ever, please remember to like, subscribe and share. It makes a heck of a difference, and I really do appreciate it. Let's get into the details of what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, and let's also make sure that I have the live comments up. Thank you to those who are in the live chat. Really do appreciate that. There's actually quite a few of you. I was worrying it might be a little bit too early for my friends in America. And for those in Australia, it's already tomorrow. So as far as I'm concerned. So happy New Year! Happy New Year to you all. May you have a healthy and successful next year, and let's all hope that this war comes to a satisfactory conclusion for Ukraine, obviously, and for the rest of the world. I think it's super important for the rest of the world, for the international world's rules-based order, that Ukraine prevails. Okay, let's start as we normally do with the Ukrainian staff, the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the day before. Sorry, it's just keeping half an eye on the live chat as well. So these figures are nothing crazy, although there's some pretty high vehicle and fuel tank losses. They've got very high drone numbers there. Of course, we saw some, we've seen some pretty high numbers of drones sent across on a nightly basis, but I've been saying over the, well, actually over the last couple of months, that these daily numbers, which are general staff numbers, they are different from the nighttime numbers. And as you can see, 127 drones last night, and yet 552 drones sent over the last 24 hours. And that far exceeds if you add up last night's drones and the night before. So and I think Jason in the thread yesterday was talking about, yeah, they are all day long sending drones, all sorts of different drones. He's involved out there, I believe, at the moment, one of the supporters of the channel. Yeah, the Russians are consistently sending both attack drones, and then during the daytime, you're going to have reconnaissance drones. You're going to have all sorts of Molniya 2s, smaller, medium-range drones that are designed to take out pieces of equipment, a bit like the Lancet as well. So a whole range of drones getting sent right throughout the day, adding up to far more than what you see on sort of 2 nights worth of drone attacks. Okay, personnel, 1,000 personnel, right on that kind of arbitrary threshold that we understand to be, you know, it's a bad day if the Russians have lost more than 1,000, but actually earlier on in the war, it's a bad day if they lost more than 300. So, you know, go figure. And we're going to talk in a little bit of depth about personnel losses for the Russians, because some interesting stats have come out. I mean, there's just so much stuff to talk about today. It's good. Right, 4 tanks, 4 armored combat vehicles. That's fairly typical. 33 artillery systems, right back up there. I don't know if that means that some of the snow has been has eased off, and perhaps sending drones slightly deeper into Russian territory has been easier for those frontline forces, and they're more able to take out artillery pieces. But that's certainly shot back up over the last 24 hours. 1 single multiple launch rocket system, 552 drones and drones sent over in the last 24 hours. That's an incredibly high number. 127 vehicles and fuel tanks. So that's very high. Fairly high personnel numbers, pretty high vehicle and fuel tank numbers. Usually there is a correlation there between those 2 numbers. So that's to be expected. And 1 piece of special equipment. Okay, so those are the numbers for the last 24 hours. We have here Anton Gerashenko actually referencing Alexander Syrsky, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, saying limiting the size of the Ukrainian Armed Forces to 800,000 troops is acceptable for Ukraine. So this is, you know, linked to the peace negotiations. Quote, it really guarantees repelling armed aggression in case of resumption. The figure also guarantees a planned mobilization process. So in other words, if part of the agreement is, and remember it was initially 600,000, that was a number touted. If it's now up to 800,000, that's not too much of a problem. We're okay with accepting that, especially as there are mobilization processes still involved or still allowed in that. So if there is a resumption, then you can actually quickly mobilize reserves and whatnot. At first, we were offered to reduce the number to 600,000, but we are satisfied with the 800,000 figure, he said in an interview. What else has he said? Russia plans to fully achieve all the goals of its so-called special military operation this year. The plans were grandiose, but we can now state that they did not come to fruition. They were thwarted. The enemy suffered enormous losses. Now, I talked about this with Greg Terry the other night, that actually the Ukrainian Armed Forces, and he was very positive about what the Ukrainian Armed Forces have achieved this year. They really have done a magnificent job of defending the front lines. It's very easy. Like, I think I've talked about this many times with you before. So General Zaluzhny, lots of people loved him, but partly because of his personality. He looked like a nice guy. He often had things like Grogu, Baby Yoda, patches and stuff. Like people like, oh yeah, he's cool. I like Zaluzhny, without really knowing how good he was at making decisions on the battlefield. And he also had a really good rapport with the troops. But again, that doesn't necessarily correlate with, or is not causally responsible for making good decisions on the battlefield. And then Zaluzhny was replaced with Syrskyi. Zaluzhny arguably didn't do a great job in the counter offensive of 2023. Now, some people say that's the West's fault for giving him bad advice on where to attack. Some people saying actually Zaluzhny overrode what the West was saying and said we need to attack in two places. The West was saying, you know, NATO support was saying you need to attack in one place. He was like, no, we need to keep going at Bakhmut and attack down to Tokhmak. You know, whose responsibility was it to attack near Tokhmak, which was a bad decision? That was where the Russians were strongest. You should learn to attack where the enemy is weakest, so on and so forth. So how good was Zaluzhny? I don't know. History will tell. I have really very little way of knowing. Yeah, we can look at some decision. I mean, Zaluzhny did admit that he was expecting to take 30 kilometers a day because he thought that the Russian forces would capitulate. And they absolutely did not capitulate. And he held his hands up and said that was a bad calculation. So we know that he did make miscalculations. Then Syrskyi's come in, and then everyone was down on Syrskyi straight away, saying he's a butcher. He's just going to plug people in and just keep going at the same kind of attritional approaches to warfare. And he's got the Soviet mindset and so on and so forth. But actually, you know, yeah, the Ukrainians hadn't had massive counter offensive successes, but they're not in a position to be able to do so. They just don't have the forces. There's been success in Kupiansk, arguably not his jurisdiction. That was the NGU that falls under the, I think, the purview of another commander in Kupiansk. But Pokrovsk has actually held, and the Ukrainians done a really good job there. Again, I don't know how to evaluate the success of Syrskyi really and know how good he is. All I will say is that the Ukrainians have done a remarkable job this year, and he's been commander. Could he have made better decisions? Probably. Could he have made worse decisions? Probably. Who knows the real evaluation there? But he says that the Russians have failed massively this year and have taken enormous losses. And that is true. The Russians have just simply not succeeded in any way remotely like what they were hoping. I mean, if we go to look at some maps here, this is the change. These are the changes to the front line for the entirety of this year. And actually, so there's worries everywhere. The Russians have just this advantage of manpower with the, you know, compared to the Ukrainians, which is something the Ukrainians are going to have to deal with. So they have to pick and choose where they defend. And unfortunately, like there's an analysis, I think, in the Euromaidan press that said they chose to counter-attack, not counter-offensive, but counter-attacking Kupiansk in the knowledge that they won't be able to defend effectively in Huliaypole. So then they've brought their elite forces back down to Huliaypole, but actually that wasn't enough. It's too little too late. But the problem is you are kind of consistently trying to rob Peter to pay Paul across the front line if you're Ukrainian, because you don't have enough to defend against the entirety of the Russian pushes right across the front line. And then you've got to worry about Sumy, you've got to worry about Kharkiv, you've got to worry about, you know, everywhere. Now, the Russians have made gains significantly down in this area here. Obviously, Pokrovsk too, but, you know, this is the big worry where they have made these advances around Huliaypole. But all things considered, you know, given the size of Ukraine as a whole, the Russians have been kept at bay fairly substantially. Syrskyi continues, we see a change in the structure of the war and its rise to a higher technological level. We observe that the war has become so technologically advanced that drones of all types now dominate the battlefield. Their quantity and quality have increased. And this is something that Zaluzhny was hinting at in that Economist piece he wrote just after he stepped aside, or maybe just before, I can't remember. Russians plan to form 14 new divisions this year. They only managed to form 7. So this is interesting. The plans for the Russians for 2025 was to form 14 new divisions, and they only managed 50% of that intention. With 2 Marine divisions consisting of only 1 regiment, they were forced to take these divisions' personnel and redistribute them into battle units. This confirms that they really have problems recruiting people. That is significant. something we have heard from Zelensky, saying that for the first time during this war, the Russians have been failing to recruit at over and above their lost numbers. So are we reaching an inflection point for the Russians, whereby I talk about these two pressure cookers that both sides have, this scenario whereby, you know, the Russians have the economy as their big pressure. They also have personnel and material losses, but essentially the economy is a big one. But actually, if you start bringing in personnel issues becoming more of a pressure inside this pressure cooker, then that's good, really good news for the Ukrainians. Ukrainians have that already. So their issue is manpower. And I would suggest also, or probably even more so, their energy issues. So Russia keeps hitting Ukrainian energy. That is a massive challenge for the Ukrainians. But they also have, you know, manpower, not so much material issues. I mean, obviously, that's a challenge for the Ukrainians. They need material, but at least they are getting fairly consistent material supply from allied partners. But if Russia is starting to feel the pressure of manpower recruitment, then this is potentially an inflection point for Ukraine, to the benefit of Ukraine. So they were forced to take these divisions personnel and redistribute them because they really do have problems recruiting people, says Sursky. I recently met with the Chief of Defence Staff of the UK and the Chief of General Staff of France. Interesting, France and UK here, not the US. So the vector has changed. We are being asked to help train their armies and their units. I believe this is the highest praise when it is no longer us asking, but others turning to us. I am told that we are the first in Europe and probably in the world. Some people are shouting about the insane advance of Russian troops deep into Ukrainian territory. Insane advance is 4.5 kilometers a month. Is that an insane advance, he asks, when the enemy pays for it every day with thousands of the lives of its soldiers? A contract system has been developed whereby a serviceman who signs a contract with very flexible terms will receive a decent money allowance. And we hear actually they're ramping up, I think, pay by threefold, is it? Uh, receive a decent money allowance. It is at least 3 times higher. Oh, here you go. He's beat me to it. 3 times higher than the current established level. At the same time, additional payments, bonuses, and financial support will be preserved. The mission of our armed forces remains unchanged: to defend our homeland, its territory and borders, and to destroy the enemy. So I thought that's a really good jumping off point. And I know we've been talking for almost 20 minutes already, and we're only on a second tab. I told you it's going to be a long one, right? Or at least there's a lot of information, right? For the first time, Ukraine has named the number of Russian prisoners of war. The Coordination HQ says over 10,000 Russian soldiers have been captured. Of course, many have been swapped already. But since February 22, 10,000 have been captured. They report a big increase in foreign mercenaries. Again, goes back to the pressure cooker pressure of recruitment. Personnel attrition for the Russians has led them to rely quite significantly on foreign personnel. Now, that's a challenge for Ukraine, because if Russia can continue to do that and do that at significant numbers, then those are people that the Ukrainians have to kill or capture, and they have to overcome. And if the Ukrainians can't recruit foreigners at that kind of level, then that's an asymmetry to the advantage of Russia. In 2025, more Russians surrendered than in 2022 and 2023 combined. So let's have a look at these details. This is coming from the project I Want to Live. In 2025, more Russians were captured than 22 and 23 combined. On average, from 60 to 90 Russians are captured every week. And in August of 2024, about 350 were captured per week. So obviously August 2024 was a bad month for the Russians. 10,000 Russian soldiers and officers have been captured in Ukraine. There's an infographic here. It's in Ukrainian. I guess someone could translate that. Probably has a lot of interesting detail on it. I'm presuming that down here we've got the different countries that have had, you know, Russian, or different countries that have provided soldiers for Russia. There's quite a few African countries here. You got Brazil, Kenya as well. That looks like Moldova. Italy, India, Iraq, Iran, China, Cuba, all sorts of different places there, Thailand even by the looks of it there. I presume that is that 7? I'm guessing here because I can't speak Ukrainian, but I'm wondering if this says 7% of POWs are foreigners, in which that okay, does that mean that 7% of Russia's army are foreigners? Well, that is huge. That is huge, right? But I don't know. Maybe because you might just take your foreigners and throw them in the front line, so they're more likely to be captured than a representative of the army as a whole, right? You get foreigners in, you're not going to put them back in HQs and in HR and whatnot. You're going to send them onto the front line. Rather, some random Malian is killed than a Russian, right? Is how I imagine the Russians would think. And I don't know if it down here it says that 40 foreigners were captured in December. I don't know if that's what that says, but it could well be. You've got a date and you've got the number 40, but I don't know. That looks like an interesting infographic that I'd like to get into deep into, but I haven't had a chance to do a translation of that. Hopefully Max 25 is going to talk us through this. So most of the prisoners were contract soldiers. About 19% are mobilized. Almost 5% are conscripts, although officially conscripts do not fight in Russia. So yeah, that's interesting. So 5% of the captured people are conscripts. They are not that well. They technically can fight up in Kursk to defend Russia from Ukrainian attacks into Russia, but they legally shouldn't be able to send conscripts, for your yearly national service and whatnot. You're not supposed to be able to send them abroad to fight. But then you got this kind of gray area well, hang on, didn't Russia then claim that, or not just claim, they constitutionally made Zaporizhia, Kherson, Luhansk, and Donetsk part of Russia, in which case, technically, they probably can send conscripts to those places. A typical Russian prisoner is an ordinary soldier without higher education, usually with a criminal record. 40% served sentences for theft, drugs, robbery, and murder. Foreigners make up 7% of prisoners. Wow. And their number is growing. That, to me, is a key stat. So that is indeed what it said. HIV and AIDS, hepatitis B and C, tuberculosis, diabetes, mental illness, in particular schizophrenia. People with such illnesses are very often taken prisoner. So there you go. Some stats there from I Want to Live project. Okay. Now moving on. So then we have the BBC, and I presume this is BBC Russia together with Mediat Zona, where they've been looking at the number of people who have died from obituaries, from social media statements, and from families and all sorts. And they have quite a tough criteria. So this is going to be a very conservative number because they the obituaries and the claims on social media have to very explicitly say that it would, these people died in a war. You can't kind of go, well, I mean, they died, we think they were serving, but there's an obituary, but it doesn't mention a war. Well, that person's not included then. So these are very conservative, and I don't think, if I'm right, they don't include DPR and LPR. So the people who are drawn up from the Donetsk or to the Donetsk People's Republic forces and the Luhansk People's Republic forces as well. So here we have Russian casualties are rising faster than at any time since the war began. So this is, again, well, on the one hand, you could say, well done, the Ukrainian forces. It could well be that the Ukrainians are just getting better at attriting Russian forces. It could also be, and it might be a case of or, it could be both, but it could also be that the Russians are just sending more troops at the Ukrainians in ridiculous ways or in desperate ways. They're desperate to take territory at the moment because they know that the peace negotiations taking place could result fairly soon in an end to the war. And the Russians are desperate that if part of the peace negotiations include drawing a line across the present zero line or along the present zero line, if then you need to move the zero line forward in order to get as much Ukrainian territory as possible. So now is the time that they're sending their troops kind of almost senselessly, well, there is a sense to it, they would just want to take territory, but without a care for those soldiers at all, at the Ukrainians. And it could be also why right now the Ukrainians are treating more Russians than at any time since the war began. So Russian sources published 40% more obituaries of soldiers in 2025 than in the previous year. I mean, that is a massive increase. Honestly, that's huge. In total, almost 160,000 Russians have been confirmed dead since the start of the full-scale war. So this, your absolute, what is it, terminate ad quiem? What is it? History, you have your, it can't be any earlier than this, and it can't be any later than this. So this historical event happened in between these two ranges because, it makes no sense for it to be earlier than this, and literally it's impossible to be later than that. Okay, so it is impossible that it's any earlier. Any fewer than 160,000 Russians having been killed. Right, that is your absolute minimum, and it's likely far higher. Well, that is a huge. I mean, what was the death toll for the Afghanistan war? Was it something like 10,000, and that was too much for them, and they ended the war? Well, it's just blown past that by orders of magnitude, and now we are at a state where I don't know. The Russians are just, I guess, all the Russians who would be against this have either left the country or they're in a gulag. And so you've got this very pliant population that just can handle this scale of deaths. 160,000 have been confirmed dead since the start of the full-scale war, according to this BBC analysis. However, military experts believe that the number is about 40% of the real number of dead. Wow. In addition, so if that's 40%, so that's going to, double is 320,000 plus another plus another 32,000. So that's going to be 352,000 if my maths is correct. 352,000. Wow. Dead. Not injured, dead. However, military experts believe that this number is about 40% of the real number. In addition, the calculation does not include servicemen of the People's Militias, the quasi-republics DPR and LPR. The BBC estimates their losses at 23.5 thousand. So then that's 300. What? We're looking at 375,000 dead. The analysis shows that the number of obituaries increased sharply in the autumn after the second summit between Donald Trump and Putin in Budapest was cancelled. In October and November, an average of 322 obituaries were published daily. Daily. So when you get the Ukrainian General Staff figures coming out and you're thinking 1,000 personnel killed, wounded, prisoner, or deserted in a day, surely not. Well, 322 obituaries are being, on average, produced a day. And that falls very much in line with this number being 322 dead, and 700 wounded. That's a KIA to WIA ratio of 1 to 2. Yeah, that's bad. If you're operating at 1 to 2, then obviously there are different types of wounded, right? But anyway, it is. I forgot where I was. Back here. So yeah, these numbers I think are extraordinary. Twice as many obituaries are being published on a daily basis in 2024. Twice as many. So one can conclude that twice as many people are dying on a daily basis than in 2024. That's absolutely extraordinary. Right. Okay. Moving on. According to the BBC, well, actually, this is the same, but there's a nice graph here. According to BBC, in Russia, in 2025, the Russians lost 40% more soldiers on the front line than at any other time since the full-scale invasion began. So 2025 is this is here. So this actually graph only has 2024 onto 2025, but you can see, how many more, particularly in the last quarter of 2025, the Russians have lost. And these are obituaries, right? So these are dead people. 12,035. Is that over the course of the quarter or the year? I don't know. I don't know where those red numbers are coming in, or since the Trump and Putin meeting in Alaska, I'm not sure. BBC has confirmed the names of approximately 160,000 dead Russians. At the same time, journalists say the real number is likely to be twice as high. Okay, then we have this from Jane Kiev. Russia's epidemic of missing soldiers has now found a solution. So the Russian government has purged all the courts of the tens of thousands of lawsuits in which Russians demanded to know if their relative was dead or alive. No one will be getting money. So they are essentially purging the courts of these lawsuits demanding to know where their relatives are, so that people can't find out. 2/3 of missing and dead persons claims are hidden on court websites. By the end of 2025, unit commanders are filing 2,500 lawsuits a week to purge their personal records. This data is now hidden, or yes, so I think there should be some punctuation in there, but I'm not sure. Anyway, yeah, so that's one way of dealing with all these missing soldiers is stop people from finding out how many there are. Stop people from being able to look at the court filings and whatnot. Okay, then we have the USF. So this is Robert Brovdin. We're going to return to him in a wee while. Magyar. So Magyar's birds, Jakub Janowski from Oryx here says, since the 1st of June 2025, the Ukrainian unmanned systems forces report inflicting over 50,000 Russian casualties, with almost 12,000 just in December. So these are casualties. Remember, this will be killed and wounded predominantly. 50,000 since the 1st of June. So in half a year, one corps, essentially, the unmanned systems forces, has been responsible for 50,000 casualties and 12,000 just this month. Absolutely insane. And of course, you can go and check out their very awesome dashboard here. So this is since the creation. If we go to today, if we just look at today, click on that one, then what are we? So it's 1:30 UK time. This is going to be 3:30 their time. 261 personnel taken out, so killed and wounded, casualties, 96 killed, 165 wounded. That's just today. Possibly somewhat lower than we've seen previously on some of their record-breaking days that end up having over 500 killed and wounded. But 648 damaged targets, and this is just today. If we look at yesterday's figure, previous day, they had almost 400 personnel killed or wounded, 1,009 damaged targets, and then it's just a wonderful website. This is kind of macabre because this will change in real time, and you'll see the numbers of personnel like killed and wounded go up. So bear in mind it's not for everyone, this, but Robert Brovdy, his group, and we're going to hear well, no, I'll leave that till later. I've got a comment from him just coming up. Okay. Then again on personnel stuff, Putin calls up mobilization reserves, allegedly to guard critical infrastructure. So there's been this ruling to call up reserves. Again, this is a way of Russia being able to mobilize without formally mobilizing. Very unpopular back in September 2022. They need to get troops or boots on the ground. How do they do that without doing a full national mobilization? Well, they clear out all the prisons. Okay, they've pretty much done that. They get people from abroad. They're getting that as much as possible. They're getting, homeless people with drug issues and mental health issues. Yep. As much as we can, just people from anywhere and everywhere. But we don't want to particularly dip into, I don't know, St. Petersburg, Yekaterinburg and Moscow elite sources there. So, okay, let's pull up reserves then. We want to mobilize those reserves and get them to fight and protect, in this case, critical infrastructure sites, they say initially, but you never know whether they end up going to the front lines eventually. Right, this was a video that came out yesterday. Ukrainian recon drone spotted a massive column of Russian troops arriving for rotation near the front line. According to preliminary reports, the entire group was eliminated by strike drones. So you can bet your bottom dollar that if a recon drone sees this, they're going to be like, get the freaking drones here right now. Because when we spot like a squad of 4 people, we're all like, drones there, let's take out those 4 people. Well, we've got like 54 people now, and they're all walking in a straight line. This is like drone alley. And apparently the claim is that these were all eliminated. So you can add that, this will be part of the 1,000 lost yesterday, arguably. But he's counting them all up here. This is apparently some kind of rotation where they alighted, they dismounted some way back, and then as they go through drone territory, they don't want to drive through, makes it too obvious. But I don't know, this looks bloody obvious to me. But of course, they're trying to do this at night, and they get spotted and supposedly eliminated. Dimko Zhuluktenko, who I've interviewed a number of times, I presume he's still drone operating. He was a reconnaissance drone operator down, a fixed-wing drone operator down in the Donetsk region previously. I don't know where he is right now. Russian idiots just dismounted near Huliaypole. I counted 43 of them. All got deleted within 3 hours by heavy bombers. So they then brought out the Baba Yagas. They often operate at night, the Baba Yagas, and they have multiple bombs on them rather than an FPV. You'd need, like, 43 FPV drones here at least to take these guys out. But where's a heavy drone bomber like a Baba Yaga? I don't know how many hand grenade sized explosives they can carry on them. I mean, it depends what size of munition you want, but you need obviously far fewer Baba Yagas to go and bomb these guys, and you can treat them literally like bombers. He says crazy stuff, really. And I don't know if this next bit of footage is actually from that. It says, this is Dimko Zhuluktenko again saying, Russian idiots getting deleted near Huliaypole. In this area at the moment, they are sending hundreds of men daily. Most get taken out by FPV and bombers immediately. So I don't know if this is reference to that long line of people that as he claims, got taken out by exactly this kind of drone, a Baba Yaga heavy bomber there. But good news for the Ukrainians there, bad news for the Russians involved. Right, then some claims along the front line. So first of all, there have been these different claims about Rodynske, which is just north of Pokrovsk, north of Myrnohrad. It's one of these areas that is like on the neck of the cauldron, and the Ukrainians need to keep this open. They need to ideally have it under their control. There's a claim from several sources that they'd counterattacked yesterday and they've taken Rodynske. Then you've got claims from the Russians that they've taken Rodynske. And here Tim White says, amid Russian claims to have captured the small town of Rodynske near Pokrovsk, Azov fighters installed the Ukrainian flag to show it's far from lost, although it is on the top of a chimney there. So it's clearly just been dropped by a drone. No one's climbed up that chimney in the middle of a war zone. So I wouldn't pay any attention to the flag, but the whole place, says Tim White, is a grey area, but soldiers of the Chervona Kalina 14th Brigade say they still hold the town. I've heard, as I've said, various things about Rodynske, including that the Ukrainians have successfully counterattacked there. Ukrainian troops held Huliaypole for months, then it fell in weeks, and they got the blame. The 102nd and 106th Territorial Defence Brigades, so these are going to be your less able, these are territorial, territorial defence brigades, mean that a certain region is these guys ideally come from that region, the TDF from, say, Vinnytsia or whatever. They won't be as good as, say, the Azov First Corps or the 3rd Assault Brigade or whatever. And these guys were tasked with holding Huliaypole, and they did for several months until they couldn't anymore, says the Euromaidan Press. Quote, these troops held their positions for a long time and suffered extremely heavy losses, yet were not rotated to the rear for rest and reconstitution. So exhausted, they had to continue to try and hold on to Huliaypole. And elite reinforcements arrived in November, but it was too little too late, they say here. The real problem, Ukraine's year-old core reforms still haven't fixed the command chaos that leaves exhausted units fighting alone. Russia has enough troops, Ukraine doesn't, and frontline soldiers pay the price. But this is the key problem. This goes back to the pressure cooker issue that the Ukrainians don't have the troops. So their major pressure, energy infrastructure, which if you don't have energy, you don't have commerce, you don't have industry, you can't build weapons, and you don't get warm. The basics, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, your population needs to have warmth and shelter and food as your basics. Without energy, you're struggling to get warmth and possibly even food, logistics and all sorts. So energy is super, 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 super important. And then manpower. You can't fight a war if you've got no one to fight the war, right? No one to operate drones, no one to... So these are two really important components, and actually they're the two that Ukraine is suffering the most with. Whereas the Russians have enough troops, at least they did have enough troops, but now it's looking like they are suffering with manpower issues. Who is this game of attritional chicken? Like I've told you for how many months, maybe years. It's like, which pressure cooker will blow first, right? Russian economy, like if you don't have an economy, you can't build stuff, you can't pay your soldiers, people mutiny, blah, blah, blah. And also your population back in Russia go, hang on, this sucks. 4 years of this war, brilliant, well done, you've taken some area down in Ukraine, but now inflation's gone nuts. I don't have a job, or this is happening, or I've lost my healthcare, or you've not been funding the schools and hospitals, and then they go out and protest. So Putin does not want protest. This is why he's closing down the information spaces. So he's stopping the Russian population's access to social media like WhatsApp and YouTube. They've been banned. Twitter's banned, although apparently Elon Musk doesn't care about that. He cares about Europeans putting some things in place to make sure that Twitter has transparency. He goes crazy about that. Russia banning them. Then, he's silent on that. Who knew? But anyway, what the Kremlin is trying to do is stop the population from protesting. So they know that this war is going to cause some social unease as the economy keeps tanking. So they're closing down the ability to form protests. So the way that you do protests is you communicate with others, right? Let's meet here. Let's all go and protest, blah, blah, blah. Or if you're not doing it through, say, WhatsApp to coordinate protesting, then you find out about a protest on social media because people are posting on Facebook or whatever. And then you go, right, I'm going to go down there and protest as well because I've seen people are there. Cool. Well, if none of that is happening, then everyone's living in their own little pockets of their own apartments and houses. Then it stops people being able to protest, knowing that it's happening. So Russia's doing that. But they are struggling, obviously, for personnel as well. So their pressure cooker is now bubbling up with that variable. So yeah, Huliaypole was a bit of a disaster, or it was a real challenge at the very least. There are some claims that Ukrainians have countered there as well. And maybe, taken some of Huliaypole back, but we'll have to wait and see because, like we just heard with Rodynske, these claims are all over the shop. So anyway, we talked about the changes to the front line already back at the front end of the video, which it looks significant. In the whole scheme of things, this is 4 years of war. It's less than a percentage of Ukraine's territory that's been taken in an entire year. And some places like Pokrovsk, you're just fighting broadly a couple of kilometers further north of where you were 12 months ago. It's an abject failure, I think, of the Russians. So we can doom about the loss of territory, and I am very concerned down here in the Zaporizhia region. I am worried for Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and etc. But there's a lot of Donetsk still under Ukrainian control, and to give that all away, as the Americans are demanding and the Russians are demanding, would be absolute insanity. And so you can understand why Zelensky's like, nah, that's a red line. That ain't happening. This is the most heavily defended area of Ukraine, and we ain't giving that away for free. Then you've got, Sumy, the Ukrainians did a good job of pushing the Russians back there. And you've got, no, actually, is that Vovchansk? Sumy's further on here. Actually, Sumy's much further up there. That you've got slightly worrying around here. However, we are hearing that the Ukrainians are pushing the Russians back along the Oskil up here, and they may have designs to push the Russians back all the way to the border. I don't know, but certainly to clear them out west of the Oskil River would be pretty useful, and that protects, this whole, arguably that could protect this area or to the east of the Oskil River all the way down to Liman and whatnot, or at least all the way down to Borova, just down here. Anyway, so good news up there. Around Chasiv Yar, the Russians haven't advanced any further in a year, pretty much. I mean, some successes for the Ukrainians, as well as some real challenges. Seversk, that's an absolute, that's not going well for the Ukrainians. Liman, really worrying around there. And of course, most of the east. But yeah, there we are. Right, in Zaporizhia direction, here we have a video of an enemy tank and IFV getting destroyed. The occupiers abandoned them during one of the unsuccessful mechanized assaults. Yeah, we haven't seen this too often, which is, we used to see this. These were 10 a penny. Every day you would see abandoned Russian vehicles get blown up by drones, particularly initially drones dropping hand grenades and whatnot into open hatches. Now, of course, FPV drones do most of that kind of stuff, and yeah, they go and blow up abandoned vehicles. Here you see vehicles getting taken out at the Ukrainians' leisure here, taking time to fully destroy them. Now, this talk about this. It's funny. Someone the other day was saying it was on the Russian, possibly Molniya 2 drones, possibly other medium-range drones, when the Russians released a montage of Rubicon of a bunch of Ukrainian radars being hit, an AN-26 plane, and a helicopter, although there are claims that that's a decoy helicopter. And then a kind of pro-Ukrainian was like, yeah, but the footage keeps cutting out just before they explode. So, and another was saying, so, yeah, I don't trust this footage because it cuts out. And then everyone partying and saying, yeah, of course it cuts out because it blows up. And there'll be a lag in the feed. So you almost always get drones having their footage cut out just before they hit the target. And of course, that's frustrating because you want to know exactly where they hit the target and therefore have a better idea of the battle damage assessment. Well, sometimes you get drones that explode, but the explosion doesn't quite take out the feed. It obviously may explode their wings and rip off certain bits, but the camera still records. Very rarely happens, but here's one of them as an interceptor drone hits a Lancet here and explodes, but it still is recording, and actually it then is spinning through the air, and it still is recording after it's blown up the Lancet. The Lancet is absolutely wrecked there. I presume that's a Lancet. So I just thought that's an interesting bit of footage to show you the rare occasion of a drone continuing to show its feed. Now, I did a breaking news video on this just before this video. I'm going to talk about this again. Obviously, it's very pertinent to hits and losses. In fact, this is one of the most hopeful areas for Ukraine going forward. Okay, so what happened last night? FP2 drones, FP1, FP2, whatever. We don't know exactly what drones they were, but these near-ear drones, some of them going a little bit further, taking out here, Max 25 says 10 infrastructure facilities were hit in temporarily occupied territories of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia regions, and Crimea, as well as 2 facilities in the depths of Russia were hit. The SBS massively attacked and delivered explosive gifts to the enemy. So, okay, we're going to go and look at this. There's an ST-68 radar system, received a direct hit from an FP1, FP2 guided drone with a 50 or 100 kilogram warhead, depending on which drone. Tonight, the Unmanned Systems Forces conducted a series of FP1 and FP2 strikes. A total of 10 targets were struck. Ravenki Oil Depot in Luhansk, watercraft base of the 92nd River Boat Brigade in Olenivka in Crimea, ST-68 3 coordinates radar system destroyed, I think, in Olenivka in Crimea as well. And then 3 deployment sites of Rubicon D, so Rubicon being the answer to Magyar's birds from the Russians. Their unit, their special forces unit in Seladove was struck. 2 enemy personnel concentration sites, the 74th Brigade and the 589th Regiment in Seladove as well. And then Melitopol substation causing a power cut in Melitopol and Zaporizhia, and Molochansk substation in Zaporizhia as well. I think, 3 deployment sites hit in Rubicon. So anyway, let's just watch this video. And I'm going to talk about how freaking important this is. So first of all, you have an absolute ton of these drones. Like, that's 1, that's 2, that's 3, that's 4. Now, doesn't seem to be all explosions. There are 5. I think something like 8 times we have drones approaching these big depot tanks. And that's really good news. So they're not just sending one in and hoping that fire will catch on to the others. They are hitting these sites with multiple drones. And these drones, I wonder sometimes when you get the 3rd drone comes in and there's 1 fire there, so you think it has 1 drone just bounced off, possibly. Then we have hits on personnel accumulations, or as is claimed, Rubicon drone special forces deployment areas. Here's that radar, the ST-68 that's hit. Just the number of strikes in one night there in Crimea, but also Luhansk and Zaporizhia is just fantastic. And some of these are also caught on camera from the ground level. So just a couple of reactions to this. So Tim White says, last night I wrote about a big attack on occupied Ukraine. It was possibly the most successful ever in terms of the number of drones. I showed the hit on Refinery oil plant in Luhansk and a blackout in Melitopol and surrounding areas. Here's a video of Ukraine's birds' greatest hits. So he's saying that possibly last night is one of the most successful. Now, let's listen to what Magyar himself says on his Twitter handle here. Deep strike update from USF Birds. The night of December the 31st was productive for deep strikes. 10 targets in the temporarily occupied territories and 2 targets deep inside the swamps. Oh, wait. By now, every night looks like this. That's the worm's new reality. Okay, rhetoric aside, you have not Peter Magyar, he's a Hungarian leader. You got Robert Brovdi here saying, this is happening every night. Last night was productive. We got 10 targets in temporary occupied territories and 2, actually that's 12 targets. Other people are saying 10 targets. No, it's 12 targets, 2 deep inside Russia. He says at the end, the USF grouping is picking up speed. So then if you want to be hopeful, if you want to be, it's freaking December the 31st today, it's New Year's Eve. I just want to be happy about what's going on in Ukraine. Please give me some good news. My good news to you is Ukraine absolutely blitzed a bunch of targets last night. Robert Brovdi saying, and that's pretty typical, we're doing that every night. Yeah. By now, every night looks like this, he says. And then he says, we're picking up speed, which means you're going to see even more every night. Which means that Ukraine has, I mean, it empirically has, because I'm showing you these freaking videos every day. They have clearly scaled up their production of FP1, FP2, or FP2 drones and equivalent, those near-rear drones. That is good news. How long have I talked to you about how Ukraine prevail in this war by striking from a distance or striking with drones, UGVs on the ground, USVs on the water, and UAVs in the air. And those UAVs, your FPV drones, your bomber drones, your then heavy bomber drones, your Mavics, and then your Baba Yagas, your Vampire drones, and then you've got your near-ear drones. And actually, you want to be using those near-ear drones on your contact line as well. That's what you got here. Seledove is pretty much your contact line, just behind Pokrovsk. And they've hit Special Forces Rubicon and 2 accumulations of 2 different units in Seledove. That's how you prevail in this war. It's this. Near rear. I'm excited when Ukraine gets those drones and missiles going deep into Russia. I love it when I see a depot or an oil refinery blow up, right? Because that stops Russia being able to pay for the war. But this stuff, this is your nuts and bolts of stopping Russia being able to prevail on the front lines directly. If you are hitting them at their staging points, if you're hitting them at their logistics behind the front lines, and if you're hitting drone launch sites and drone depots, then they can't use that stuff against Ukraine on the front lines or use that stuff to send their own drones into Ukrainian territory. This is what to watch for next year, this year, now. Last week, next week, FP2 drones or Aubrey drones or whatever drones they're using to do this. This is honestly what I'm most hopeful of right now for the Ukrainians. And you can see that I'm in a good mood about this. I'm quite excited about this. When you've got like Brovdi just listing this, 3 deployment points of Rubicon D special unit, Seledove Donetsk region, TOT Birds, first separate Center, USF grouping, then Refinery Oil Depot, Luhansk region, TOT, joint operation with the SBU, base of a watercraft of the 92nd River Boat Brigade, Olenivka, ARC, TOT Birds, first separate center, USF grouping. So he's listing the people who are doing this. It's not just his own. He does it in coordination. 3 coordinate radar station, ST-68 destroyed, Olenivka, ARC, TOT Birds, first separate center, USF grouping. 2 enemy manpower deployment points from the 74th Motorized Rifle Brigade and 589th Motorized Rifle Brigade, again, Seledove, same peeps. Melitopol substation, Molotchansk substation. Then you're like, and he says, Eyes and Sting, the Worm's nightmare, the USF grouping is picking up speed. All your expletives, Worms, you know the drill. He's saying, and it's going to get worse. So Jumpy here, as a great source on Twitter, does all the counting of the bases and the storage of vehicles, talking about how this ST-68 radar system was destroyed in Olenivka, says, "Holy crap, man, it's a turkey shoot down in Crimea. Wonder how long Russia can afford this air defense anti-aircraft attrition." To which John P. then says, no. This is it. Jeff 2146, who's a great source, says they already cannot sustain it, the Russians, which is why we are seeing strikes on airfields in Crimea. And this is a vibe. And this was one of my favorite. This is from Chernobivka. Is that no? As I'm saying that right. Anyway, the airfield just behind Kherson, which at the beginning of the war, the Russians would put all their like helicopters and trucks and tanks on the airfield. Then the Ukrainians would blow them up, and then they'll go, "Oh no," and then they'll put it back there, and then the Ukrainians would blow them up, and then they put. And this went on like 15 times or whatever. And then in the end, when the Ukrainians took back Chernobivka or whatever it's called, there were all these like husks of vehicles that have been, and helicopters and all sorts of, just this rotating situation. And Crimea feels a bit like that, where they're just bringing in, we see them bring them across Kerch Bridge, extra like air defense systems and radars, and then they just get churned up and destroyed by Magyar's birds, and then it just keeps on going. And you got to this point where the airfields are now it's open season on the airfields, and we keep seeing these drones attack actual planes and helicopters and whatnot in Crimea because their air defense has been so attrited over time. And again, it's these kind of 200-kilometer range drones that are doing an awful lot of damage. Then, so going back to then 2 nights ago, was it 2 nights ago this week? Who knows? But I think it was 2 nights ago. So I reported yesterday morning that Magyar's birds again had destroyed all sorts of Shahed drone facilities, particularly around Donetsk airports, right, where they launched Shaheds. They had a Shahed, I think, repair facility. They had a depot as well. Anyway, we now understand that the launch base of the Shahed drones was under attack by 17 FP2 attacks, and it seems that they've mapped exactly where they've hit and correlated it with the video that you saw that I showed you yesterday. But anyway, 17 FP2 drones attacking that one place in one night. We're talking about scale. And then last night you had probably more FP2 drones attack, because remember you had looked like sort of 8 of those drones sent at the Ravenki oil depot. Then you had all the other places. We've got scale and we've got success. And this is going to be hurting the Russians. If this is happening every night, then, multiply that by 7. If you've got 20 FP2 drones being sent a night, that's 140 a week, and they are doing some serious damage. So this is just good news. And these are now being all sort of geolocated and whatnot. It's just a good haul for the Ukrainians last night, and that's before we get onto the distance strikes. Anyway, let's just take a breather, just for my own sanity, more than yours. We've been going, goodness me, an hour, and I've just got onto distance strikes. Right, but this is a New Year's Eve special, I guess. Just a few thanks to Johnny Nevergard for being in the zone. Thank you to Kevin Forst and to Richard Demi for your generosity with the ATP Geopolitics memberships. Really appreciate that. Thanks, guys. Happy New Year. And Aussie T says, Happy New Year, JP and team. 1 hour to go in Queensland. Oh, Struth, mate. Have a good one. Yeah, nice. Just such a shame in a way that England destroyed Australia in the Ashes down in, was that in the MCG in Melbourne? It's because it's only a 2-day, 5-day test. 3 days of people selling tickets and buying stuff there. I think it's going to lose the Aussies 5 million quid. 2-day test matches aren't good for test cricket, really. Although it's amazing to watch. We absolutely destroyed the Aussies, but then they're beating us already 3-0 in the test series. So that's 3-1, and we can only get back to 3-2. But anyway, I think that's the first time we've won there in 20 years or something. So good stuff. Anyway, g'day, mate. Normality Remembered said, gift for you for your persistence in getting out validated information to dispel Russian lies in 2025. I have a question too. If you would choose one thing that you hope for in 2026, what would it be? The deposing, the democratic. something, it'll be Trump not being in charge, but also JD Vance not being in charge. Absolute wipeout in the midterms. Essentially what I'm trying to say is what I'd most want in 20, however it comes about, I don't know, but what I most want is the US to get back on side with Ukraine. If the US were backing Ukraine to the hilt now, Russia would be in Russia, the war I think would have been over. If we had had 10 months of even Biden era support for Ukraine, I think Russia, because imagine where we are now, and that's with Trump doing, and all these other people around Trump doing everything he can not to support Ukraine. So if you just had Biden for the last 10, 11 months, then you would have had continued support for Ukraine. But I don't know whether you would have had a real ramping up of European support. So that might have come about as a result of Trump doing his things. Anyway, I would like there to be a renewed support in the United States for Ukraine. And I don't mean for the people, you guys, you Americans watching this, of course you support Ukraine. I mean at the heart, the Trump administration. And we're going to talk about that at the end of the video because some pretty shocking stuff has come out in the last 12 hours or so. That's what I'd hope for. Alexander and Islands, or Alexander Sand Islands, or who knows. Hi, Mr. Pierce. I've sent you something to your Facebook account that you may find interesting for this video reference staff loss numbers for the full year. Thank you. I'll look at that. I won't be able to look at it right now because it'll take me about 5 minutes and I'll be like, you guys will be twiddling your thumbs, but thank you. And I'll look at that hopefully to talk about tomorrow, but really appreciate your super chat. Pete Watson, Happy New Year from Australia. God bless Slava. Ukraine, may Russia, land of ash, Ukraine, one whole free, Slava Ukraine. That's a lot of words there, but essentially Slava Ukraine and may Russia be a land of ash. Thank you, Pete Watson. Thanks for your support and thank you for supporting Ukraine. And the final one just for now, BME. All right, mate. Good to have you on board. Hope you had a good Christmas. I did actually have a New Year's tipple on me. Thank you very much, BME. And thank you for your consistent support throughout the year. Really, really do appreciate it. Right, let's get back to, and I know there'll be lots of great comments in the live chat, and I'm so sorry I'm not able to get them to them today, but there's just so much information to share with you. Right, we're going to go now to the distance strikes. And we have 127 drones sent into Ukraine, 101 of which were intercepted, which leaves 26 to hit, which is about, that's going to be, I don't know, probably 80% interception rate, something like that. I don't know. During the night, the, what do we have? 80 Shaheds were involved in 127. So it's interesting, 80 out of 127 were Shaheds. What were the other 47? Did they have warheads? How many are decoys? How many are other drones that do have warheads as well? And, you know, or is Shahed a shorthand for ones with warheads that can be like Gerberers as well as short Shaheds? I don't know. Ukraine shot down or jammed 101 of them. At least 20 drones hit 11 locations. Combat operations are ongoing. We have some pretty startling footage here of an intercepted drone chasing a Shahed, though, chasing a Shahed drone and then hitting the Shahed drone, and the Shahed drone exploding. This is a success for an interceptor drone, and this is great. We're seeing more and more of these being used on a daily basis, and you can see essentially every single one I've seen has chased them from behind, which means they need to travel at a faster clip than the Shahed drones, and then explode either on impact or some kind of proximity. Or I don't know whether the explosives are triggered by the operator who can press a button and it explodes. So you just need to get it near enough, or whether the impact, there are probably different types of these drones. Here is a Sting drone from Wild Hornets that is taking out a Shahed drone that I believe this is a modernized Shahed here. I don't know what kind of modernization is apparent. Let's see if you guys can work it out. So here we have, so it's a prop drone. It's not a Jet One. It certainly has an antenna on the back. That's something we don't often see, actually. I've not seen that before. Antenna sticking up, an aerial sticking up at the back. So there's some kind of probably improved comms going on there. But it's, yeah, wobbling around there. And then that's hit. And then, so what's interesting here is you've got another Sting drone coming up behind. Now, that's interesting. So they've Do they send up 2 interceptor drones when they can for every Shahed to make sure that if one fails to detonate or goes wrong, it doesn't fully take it out, that another one takes it out? Yeah, how often do you get a chance to get 2 interceptor drones up there? But there's certainly another one watching that initial explosion. Right, then we're going to move on to this, a Kinzhal missile. So another high precision, scare quotes, high precision Russian Kinzhal missile landed in a residential building and didn't explode. These people were incredibly lucky. Look at this. I mean, goodness me. There you go. I hope they've taken a fuse out of that. I wouldn't like to be the guy getting that out of the hole and pulling it up by crane. It's all right. Hopefully it'll be all right. I won't bang this woodwork here. Bang. Oh dear. Yeah. So yeah, rather him than me. But yeah, I presume it's been disarmed because they're whacking it in the back of a van. Obvs. But there you go. That's a Kinzhal missile that didn't explode. I wonder how many fail to detonate. Obviously still causes some kinetic damage there. Now, Russians have been focusing an awful lot on Odessa for the last few days, indeed, as they have been for the last few months. Russians struck Odessa yesterday with, I believe, it might have been a ballistic missile yesterday. Certainly, they have been targeting Odessa with a number of ballistic missiles the last few nights. Not last night. I don't think we didn't see any ballistics last night, but that was yesterday daytime. And then here we have... let's just make sure these might need re-rendering. So I've been speaking for so long. A 7-month-old baby is among 3 children injured in Russia's drone attack on Odessa overnight. I think 6 people died over the whole of the last 24 hours in strikes. The strike hit apartment buildings. That's not just in Odessa, though. It's all over Ukraine. This is in Odessa. So 7-month-old baby injured, one of 3 people injured. The strike hit the apartment buildings on New Year's Eve, hospitalizing all 3 minors. All 3 were children. 1 adult is in serious condition. Parts of the city lost power and heat. So yeah, pretty typically terrible stuff from the Russians there. And Max 25 says, right now the enemy continues to massively attack Odessa region with strike drones. This is last night. The Russians are once again targeting civilian and energy infrastructure. In one of the settlements of the region, warehouses of the logistics company caught fire as a result of the attack. And here we can see some, what I presume is a logistics company having been hit there. And also in Odessa, Tim White says, as I reported last night, more power problems in Odessa. 2 more DTEC facilities were hit. Goodness me, they're just getting consistently hammered, the energy infrastructure, particularly around Odessa, but pretty much everywhere, causing significant further damage. It's the 25th energy infrastructure attacked by Russia in 2025, with 10 substations hit this month alone. So you can see that definitely the Russians are focusing on the energy infrastructure across Ukraine. That is, as I keep saying, one of my main worries for Ukraine. It's a personnel, it's a pressure cooker component there, the variable in the pressure cooker. It's the energy infrastructure and personnel. Right, to continue that along the same vein here, the Kherson combined power plant that's been hit a number of times now cannot be repaired. According to the council, they're looking for alternatives following repeated shelling of the plant and inability to even attempt repairs. 470 apartment buildings are without heat. So Kherson is becoming untenable, and the combined heat and power plant there being put out of action by the Russians. They also have apparently hit 2 bulk carriers. I presume this is in the last 24 hours. There was a part of the Rubicon video that I was talking about with the Russian equivalent to Magyar's birds hitting in near rear areas, but actually up to 260 kilometers away from front lines, including strikes on some ships in Odessa or one of the ports around there. I don't know if this refers to ships that were struck in that video, because there are a couple of dry cargo ships that were hit. But anyway, Russian drone strikes have hit 2 bulk carriers, one of which was entering the port to load wheat. The Ukrainian Navy has said the vessels Emakris 3 and Captain Karam were damaged in the attack. Civilians were injured. So this did cause injury to, one presumes, crew members, and some fairly significant damage by the looks of it to the hull of this one cargo vessel, but possibly, 2 that could well be 2 separate. Well, it says 2 separate vessels were hit there. Right, before we go on to Ukrainian successes last night. Let's return to the issue of Putin's residence being hit by the Ukrainians, attacked by the Ukrainians. It wasn't hit, and it arguably wasn't attacked, right? So this was announced by the Russians, and then Trump came out and said how angry and appalled he was, and essentially believed Putin. And then you had statements from the Pakistanis, the UAE, the Indians, and the Chinese all condemning Ukraine for this. And Ukraine like, but we didn't do this. This is a bunch of hogwash. What are you talking about? So Zelensky's come out and said, to be honest, it causes misunderstanding and unpleasant feelings that some representatives like India, the Emirates, and a few other states supposedly condemned our drone strikes on Putin's residence, which did not happen. And where is their condemnation, by the way, that all this time Russians are hitting our children, killing people? I don't hear anything from India, to be honest, right now, or from the Emirates. And he's absolutely nailed it there. It's like bloody double standards. Don't come and whinge about us supposedly attacking Putin's residence when we didn't do it, especially when you've been silent, when Russia has actually killed umpteen people in Ukraine and tried to assassinate me 20 times. Thank you very much. I'm adding that last bit, but that's what you should have said. So the US ambassador to NATO, so this is Matthew Whitaker, he has come out and cast doubt on the alleged Ukrainian attack on Putin's residence. Oh, so this is interesting. US ambassador to NATO, Matthew Whitaker, cast doubt on Russian President Vladimir Putin's accusation on December the 29th that Kiev had tried to attack his residence in northern Russia, in Novgorod. Quote, it is unclear whether it actually happened, Whitaker told Fox News on December the 30th. Excellent. And on Fox News, that's what we want to hear. President Zelensky previously dismissed Putin's claim as, quote, another lie, warning that Moscow could use the allegation to justify potential strikes, most likely targeting Kiev. Expect that tonight. Macron, so Emmanuel Macron, the French leader, his circle says France found no convincing evidence of a Ukrainian drone strike on Putin's residence, per Le Monde. Russian claims contradicted themselves, and partners saw nothing credible. EU leaders discussed Moscow's reaction, while the ISW, Institute for the Study of War, and the US are also skeptical and investigating. It's not looking good for the Russian claims here. And then we have, of all people, bloody Alexander Lukashenko, the Belarusian dictator, saying on the alleged attempted strike on President Putin's residence, there was no point, quote, no point in such an attack because Putin doesn't go there. They knew this, so why send 90 drones? He added that if Ukrainian President Zelensky was unaware of the operation, it would suggest that Ukraine is poorly governed. So it's either it didn't happen because it's a stupid thing to do because they're never going to get there, or it did happen, but Zelensky didn't know about it, which means what's he doing governing and not knowing about these strikes? But essentially, he's saying it didn't happen. And that's pretty interesting. But it hasn't stopped the Russians coming up with absolute freaking nonsense. So here they have in some kind of press conference or whatever, the military has come out and says, well, no reports states that the Russian MOD is scrambling to prove an alleged Ukrainian drone attack on Putin's Valdai residence, rolling out arrows on a map graphics and snowy debris photos. They claim it was a, quote, carefully planned, multi-layered strike from Sumy and Chernihiv regions, yet admit no damage or casualties. Remember, they that night claimed that 18 Ukrainian drones were shot down in Novgorod as a whole, and made this as a Russian MOD and made no claims about Putin's residence. And then later on that day, Putin came out and Lavrov came out and said 91 drones tried to take out Putin's residence. Hang on, you said earlier this morning that only 18 drones were in Novgorod as a whole and all of them were shot down. Now you're saying 91 drones are attacking his residence. So that doesn't make sense. Then there was no evidence. Then they claimed they didn't have to provide evidence because, we shot everything down. And then because everyone stopped believing them, they're like, okay, we better find some evidence. So they brought out some pictures with arrows on and some debris on a bit of snow. Well, whoop-de-doo. And then you got this video. I mean, this is definitely bona fide, stone cold evidence against Ukraine here. I mean, this is a court of law. They've won this case. They've won this case, hands down. Russia shows Ukrainian drones shot down while flying, quote, flying towards Putin's residence, carrying a 6-kilogram charge. So we found some 6-kilogram huge old drones by a tree in some snow. And I'm telling you this from behind a face covering. So you don't know who I am. You don't know where I am. But look, this is a Ukrainian drone, he says, 2 kilometers behind Pokrovsk. Bunch of douchebags. And then look, here's the map with arrows on. Here are all the drones, all 91 of them. Look, they flew and some of them went slightly sideways here. A slightly curved trajectory there, but generally they all attacked Putin's place. Apart from, we got no evidence. But look, we got a map, so well done. Russia's MOD released a map allegedly showing the flight path of Ukrainian drones targeting Putin's residence. Meanwhile, no evidence of the strike has been provided, and even Kremlin narratives contradict each other. Because remember, Russian news outlets went to Valdai and interviewed 14 residents who said, well, it's totally silent. We didn't hear anything. Nothing. Okay. Only because Sergei Lavrov's just said 91 drones have just been shot down. No, we didn't hear anything. Okay. I'm not sure what to believe. I am. I'm pretty sure that it didn't happen. And Putin's talking nonsense. But the problem is, Trump wanted to believe that and came out and said he was really angry. I mean, that's what Ukraine is up against. Not just Russia, but it's up against the US at the moment, which is why I said earlier, one of the big things that I want to happen this year is the US comes back on side with Ukraine. Whether that means that Trump and Vance have to go, I don't know. But Congress need to wrest back some kind of power from Trump, because we can't go on with Trump ruining the international world order. He's an absolute muppet, and the people around him are insanely dangerous. And we're going to get on to some more evidence to suggest that at the end of the video. Sorry this is taking so long, but there's an awful lot to talk about. As Gary Gregor says, these 14 residents of Valdai have just volunteered for the front line. You can imagine. Oh, you said that, did you? Oh, right. Well, it's not convenient to our narrative. So we need you down in Pokrovsk right now. So see you later. Yeah. Right. Okay. And thank you for all the mods here. So Cheryl Watley, as ever, is reminding people to go to atpgeo.com/donate to donate to the campaign that we are presently running. Yes. And I love this from Kevin Force. In case anyone has not noticed, JP has mods from all over the world, American and all over Europe and Australia. I'm so grateful to be part of this community. All of you give me hope. I think you guys are bloody wonderful, which is what keeps me coming back to talking to you. So thank you. Thank you for being you, I guess. Right. Okay. Now we're getting on to further Ukrainian successes. So if you weren't happy enough with those FP2 drones striking Crimea, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and so on and so forth, you got some more to come. Whoop-de-doo. Right, but first of all, Euromaidan Press reports 95% of Ukraine's long-range drones are now domestically produced. So that's really good news. A key commander says supply is stable and growing. Good news going forward. Major effects expected in 2026 as Kyiv steps up deep strike operations. So let's all feel a bit positive about Ukraine going into 2026. Assuming that there's not going to be peace by next Wednesday, let's assume that Robert Magyar is correct and that this guy that is referenced here is correct. You have a scaling up of medium-range drones, and you've got a scaling up of long-range drones, and that Ukraine is able to build these themselves. And they're also getting funding from places like Germany. But you also have the Narwhal cruise missile coming from Czechia. You've got the Breakstop cruise missile coming from the UK, hopefully. And you've got potential ballistic missiles coming from the UK. A hypersonic air ballistic missile, I think, coming from the UK that will be a cheap and cheerful one. That's been the remit for the UK MOD to get stuff for Ukraine. Then you've got Ukraine's own Firepoint producing FP5s, hopefully at scale. So Flamingo missiles, Long Neptune missiles. And then you've got the FP7 and FP9 ballistic missiles, tactical ballistic missiles and long-range ballistic missiles. You start seeing Ukraine be able to fight the war that they have to fight, which is a war from a distance. And I've said this since February frickin' 2022. They win this war by fighting from a distance. They prevail in this war. I don't think anyone wins this war. I think it's who loses it the worst. No one wins the war. That's just the nature of the beast here. Like if there's a peace negotiation that favors Russia, they haven't won the war. They've lost a couple of million people, either from fleeing or from dying. and they're a pariah state, and they've chomped through their reserves. No one likes them, and is ruined as a country for a good few years, right? That's not winning. And Ukraine aren't going to win this. They're not going to win their territory back. I don't think, certainly not militarily. I mean, to get their territory back, I think you're talking about diplomatically getting most of it back. You know, if they're ever going to get Crimea back, it's going to have to be like pressure from the international community on Russia, hopefully a regime change, and then Putin or whoever replaces Putin not being a dipstick and saying, yeah, actually, you can have Crimea back or whatever. So, you know, I think that's the most likely outcome. But no one wins this, right? It's not like a 6-0 drubbing. It's just, anyway, I know some people have different definitions of win, but that's my opinion, and I'll stick with it. But that's why I keep using the word prevail. Prevail is my kind of get out jail free card. Ukraine prevails here with long distance strikes, and going into next year, it's looking better. And in fact, it's been pretty good this year. Yeah, that's a really good point, by the way, from James Kelso. Plus, JP, there are no restrictions on how they use their own long-range missiles. And also, we have seen Storm Shadow missiles be used without restriction by the looks of it. So that's good news. I don't know if that's a US, Grinkovich, the NATO commander in Europe, allowing that, or whether that's a UK thing or both. But that's really good news that they've used Storm Shadow missiles on Russian oil refineries. But also, they make their own stuff, of course. They can use them how they want, which is really, really important. Okay. More good news here. Ukraine has increased attacks on Russian energy infrastructure this month, December, just in case you didn't know, and I got it wrong anyway, hitting the most assets and the widest range of targets since the war began, says Bloomberg. December has seen at least 24 assaults on Russian refineries, oil tankers, and other assets at sea, and major pipeline infrastructure. And of course, that's going to have been surpassed because that's going to be probably 2 days old now. They've just had 2 nights of striking more and more stuff. So add that in. I mean, last night a load of, and we're going to see a load more stuff in a second. But already from the previous video, we saw an oil depot that was absolutely ransacked. So yeah, oil and gas processing plants, they've been majorly hit. Sea infrastructure been hit quite a bit. Tankers, obviously things like Novorossiysk, Tuapse, and other Taman, the port of Taman. Tankers as well, and major pipeline infrastructure. Remember, the Druzhba pipeline in Zakarpattia area in Transcarpathia was hit 3 nights ago, which I think is really significant too. So this is good news. So they've totally, look at that. They've massively ramped up December. You know, here's December, here's October. So the last couple of months, hugely ramping up these strikes, but the last kind of quarter really ramping up those strikes. And I assume that if everyone's telling us the truth, they're going to have even more FP1s, FP2s, FP5s, long Neptunes, FP7s, FP9s, blah, 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 blah. And you're going to get even more strikes going into January. So however bad it is for Russia at the moment economically and in terms of committing to the war near the front lines with those FP2 targets and whatnot, it's going to be worse by the end of January. Can we say that the screw is tightening? That's if I'm being as positive as possible, and it's New Year's Eve, so I'm going to be. Right, this was a drone bomber map that came out last night. And what's significant about this is this was the 3rd drone bomber map that came out yesterday evening. So there had already been 2 waves of attacks that looked somewhat similar to this. You know, mainly concentrate. This was the first one, I think, that was mainly focusing on Crimea. These would be your FP2 type drones that we've just seen the video of. But then you had all these ones going up towards Russia, up towards Moscow. And we're going to learn about that in a second. So this was a 3rd wave. And that, again, tells you that the Ukrainians have scaled capabilities here. They have a capacity to build quite a few. Sorry, none of my windows appear to be rendering. In fact, what I'm going to do, if you can bear with me a second, I'm just going to scale through all of these. Control tab through them all, just to make sure that by the time I get to them, they are all there for you. Right, okay. So let's go then from this drone bomber map to the analyst who says, a long night for Moscow last night. Ukraine sent in a drone swarm designed to act as decoys, jammers and concealers, allowing a strike to take out enough of the power grid to kill the electricity for 600,000 Muscovites. At last, the Russian capital is experiencing what it rains down on Kiev and much of the rest of Ukraine, and has been doing so for most of the last 4 years. The wheel has turned, and now at last Russians too will find themselves suffering the consequences of Putin's war. It's no longer confined to the battlefield or the regions near the front. No light, no TV, no anything. No centrally planned heating, just the start of a long, cold winter. Because if Ukraine can do it once, it can now do it again. And it's only getting worse from here. The war is not popular in Russia, but few people have felt it. The excuses for one-off events are easy enough to cover once it becomes a regular, perhaps even semi-permanent state that inconveniences everyone. Just to add to sky-high inflation, high fuel prices, the pressure on Putin will grow, and he knows it. Long term, it's how does it play out? Do those around him decide their positions are now so threatened he has to go, or will it take far more an open protest to get him to act? Major uprising in Moscow would be difficult to contain. The plan is to hit anyone starting so hard and fast others are deterred from joining. But sometimes, as is happening again in Iran right now, the protests mushroom everywhere despite no internet and restricted mobile comms. So so much to talk about there, but I'm not going to go into too much detail other than Iran's an interesting case where I think the currency is devalued so much and real economic hardship is on the agenda that actually they're coming out in mass protests against Ayatollah Khamenei. And that is a good thing. Could the similar sort of thing happen in Russia if there are these economic pressures? There, water shortages and food inflation are so out of hand it's beyond ignoring for most people. That's Iran. Freezing, dark nights, and high food costs, along with what's clearly a worsening economic situation, are going to make Russians question their future. The cracks are now deep in Russia. The system can barely hold itself together. The sticking plasters the government uses to hide the cracks aren't enough, and nothing is healing. Everything is slowly getting worse, from private debt and defaults to rapidly rising non-military industrial failures and closures. The banks are stressed to the point of failing, being just hours away at times. Every day is a banking emergency. Mobile internet is almost permanently off nationwide. The government has taken away every popular app and wants everyone to use just one. That's the Max app. And many refuse because they know what it's really for: monitoring and censorship. There's a marked realization now that Putin's promises of security in exchange for power are now a chimera. Russians are not secure. The war is getting closer. They are now seeing it with their own eyes. On the battlefield, things are not good. Ukraine has blunted the Pokrovsk offensive and yesterday took back more ground. They also reduced Russian positions near Liman, taking back territory west of the Oskil River. Small but effective and meaningful. It's been years since really effective counterattacks have yielded such results. You can't help but see it. The tide of the war has turned, he says. It's running against Russia. It's just the start. Putin and his successors will rue the day they never made peace and lied their way into keeping the fight going. What's Pokrovsk, Russia's Stalingrad? Ukraine can win this fight, but it won't end yet. Slava Ukraini. Ukraine. That's his very positive outlook. So take that with a pinch of salt. But there's a lot in there that I'd be in agreement with. And we've been talking about how close Russia are to economically collapsing, but the last few weeks, the last month or so, last 2 months, really, I think the economic screw has been turning on the Russians, and they're really feeling it. And I think that's the key. You then start adding that to missile strikes in the near ear, but then missile and drone strikes, in the near ear, but also deep into Russia, and you get a sense of growing unease in Russia potentially. So an attack by unknown drones was experienced in Melitopol in occupied Crimea. We know that was as a result of the aforementioned Robert Brovdy. Magyar, his birds led to no electricity in the city of Melitopol with the FP2 drone strikes there. So Melitopol, as you can see from this video, blacked out after the strike there. So no electricity apart from some, I don't know what power those lights are on. But there's no power. Generally, there was no power in Melitopol. Then it's Ramenskoye here. So actually not the first time that the Ramenskoye's lost power. It did lose power a couple of weeks ago, I think, but a big one last night. The moment of the strike there on the substation, you can see the very bright white light in the background as it was struck, and this led to a blackout in parts of Moscow, Ramenskoye, east of the capital, totally without power. You can see none of those apartment buildings had any power there. That's good news. It was 2 nights before New Year, and all through the houses, not a creature was stirring, not even a light. I love that from Tim White there. A bit of a reference to the old poem story. Was it Night Before Christmas? Anyway, yeah, so there you go. Power out for 600,000 Muscovites. Blackout in Moscow. Over 600,000 Russians are reportedly without power, according to Russian media. No official cause confirmed yet, but it follows earlier reports of a Ukrainian drone swarm targeting the region. Yeah, good news there. And another video here of the darkness in Ramenskoye. Russia's rushing dozens of mobile generators to apartment blocks, where they lit up apartment blocks again, but through mobile generators, before trying to prop up Moscow's grid by any means. Seems like power isn't coming back soon. That's no reports there. So that was Ramenskoye in Moscow. Then, of course, we hear that Luhansk and Donetsk were under attack, possibly from these FP drones that we saw earlier. HIMARS missiles, is claimed Tim White, may be flying to Luhansk, while drones are the danger for the invaders in Donetsk. Now, going back to these near-ear drones and how successful they might well be being at the moment, also should be going forward. Remember when Ukraine got their hands on HIMARS and M140s and whatnot, these guided multiple launch rocket systems, and they were hammering the Russians right across the front lines, so that the Russians had to move all their depots back 100 kilometers because these guys had an 84-kilometer range on their missiles. So for safety, they pulled everything back 100 kilometers. And we were all talking about HIMARS. There were so many videos of HIMARS coming out. Well, now the HIMARS have been replaced with these drones, and these drones do the same sort of thing, but they can go up to 200 kilometers. And you are starting to see, I think, the Russians kind of probably panicking because, well, we can't pull our depots and our logistics back 200 kilometers because then they fail to be the logistics and have the utility that we require from them, right? We need to be supplying our contact line with X, Y, and Z, and we can't do that from 200 kilometers back. But the Ukrainians are now, I mean, these drones are the new HIMARS, and I imagine they still have HIMARS as well. And Pearl Initiative gets them, HIMARS missiles that they can fire aplenty at the Russians. So you get the pinpoint accuracy of those HIMARS missiles with these FP drones slamming in at night, and Aubrey drones and other types. This is a potentially good purple patch for the Ukrainians. Then we hear that Tuapse, and the port of Tuapse again getting hit by the Ukrainians. Just now, direct hit. This was last night on a refinery in Tuapse. The gas facility is on fire there. And then here is an image or video that was doing the rounds last night all over the socials. A huge flame, probably dozens of meters in height, raging at the Tuapse refinery in Russia. That's not just a flare going off, that's for sure. So significant strike arguably being done there. In Tuapse, according to preliminary data, the AVT-12 unit is on fire, key unit for primary oil processing at the local refinery, which is responsible for atmospheric vacuum distillation of raw materials, with a capacity of about 12 million tons a year. That's according to Drone Bomber. And there's some geolocation done of what has likely been hit there and is on fire. So that's good news from Tuapse. Then we had the oil depot in Rodynske on fire. So this was those FP drones earlier, reported as an attack on the oil depot there. Caught on camera at ground level, as well as seeing those FP2 drones smash into those many of those tanks. So this is then Rodynske. So Russian Telegram channels report a fire at an oil depot in Rodynske, Russia, after a reported drone attack. Some really, really significant flames happening here in Rodynske. More and more fire in Rodynske, as you can see from this video. And then here we have even more fire from this source here. Really significant flames going up at the oil depot in Rodynske. Another hit deep inside Russia. So really good news there. Major fire reported at the FSKU temp oil depot at the Russian state reserve in Rodynske, Yaroslavl region after Ukrainian drone strikes. The depot is located 700 kilometers from the front line. So this is a nice deep strike, 700 kilometers deep into Yaroslavl, and we have all sorts of burning evidence of burning oil there. The huge fire at Rodynske. So all sorts of angles coming. It is not looking good there. That's going to hurt the Russians. And then finally, just one more from Rodynske. I think this is the last one. 700 kilometers from the front line. And then we go on to a powerful explosion rocked the Lykoslavsky district of Tver region this morning. So another target has been hit. A number of fire engines and police were dispatched to the scene. And there are more videos and the sound of these things. I mean, you won't hear this, but basically, yeah, you've got explosions and whatnot going off there. So in the Tver region near Piatnica, the SRTO-Torzhok gas pipeline may have been attacked. SRTO-Torzhok gas pipeline is a major gas trunk line in Russia, part of the unified gas transmission system, which plays a key role in transporting natural gas from Western Siberian fields. That is potentially very good news again. So a whole bunch of stuff happening. Then there's this. This is right now. In fact, I've been speaking for almost freaking 1 hour, 40 minutes. Who knows? These things might have hit already. Lipetsk Oblast, Tula Oblast, detection of 2 Storm Shadows or Neptune cruise missiles from Kharkiv region in the direction of LPI and Voronezh, Belgorod, Lipetsk, and Tula regions. Saratov Oblast, Tambov Oblast, attention to possible Neptune anti-ship missiles from the Voronezh region. This is all happening now. Yay! Good news. In fact, let's go and see if there has been any more news before we get on to other bits and pieces. So what else do we have? Because all this stuff emerges throughout the day. 2 Buk and Tor air defense systems destroyed within 1 hour by the Asgard Battalion 412 Nemesis. Here's the thing. I presume that's the same Nemesis battalion. You know, I went to Ukraine with all the guys back in February this year, and we had a fixer, which was one of Pierre's mates. So we paid this guy who was, I think, then a student. Maxime is a lovely guy, and he helped me. If you remember, some of you who might have seen the videos of me on, I've got multiple sclerosis. My balance is screwed. I can barely walk, particularly at the moment. And I was put on this electric scooter, and Benny Pye and Maxime were running alongside me, making sure I didn't fall off this electric scooter as we're bombing around in Kiev, looking at some of the sites there. And Maxime has now joined the Nemesis unit, and you know, hats off to him for doing so. You know, absolutely fabulous. So you know, good luck to Maxime there. But this is the Nemesis unit taking out 2 decent bits of air defense capability there. That's what we want to see. France and UK are ready to participate in monitoring the ceasefire, even without a UN or EU mandate. That's brilliant. That's what I've talked about this before. We need to do things unilaterally or bilaterally rather than, you know, as part of NATO or even the UN, because that would just hold people back from doing stuff. You need, you know, Germany, UK, France, we need to just go and say, right, we're going to help. We're going to fly planes in the west of Ukraine, create a no-fly zone. I'd love to see that. But that won't come from NATO. That won't come from the UN. That will have to come. And that will therefore be a risk on the country supporting Ukraine solely. So, yes. Friedrich Merz, we are not victims of external circumstances. We are not a plaything of great powers. Our hands are not tied. Let us not listen to the fearmongers and doomsayers. Good on you, mate. Okay, Ukraine hit 2 Russian oil sites on New Year's Eve, a refinery in Tuapse and a fuel depot in Rodynske. Both fires were confirmed by Russian sources. The 1,500 kilometer apart strikes deepen Ukraine's campaign against oil infrastructure. Now, I don't know if that Rodynske oil refinery is the same one as Magyar's Birds took out, which was the it was this one. No, not that one. Where am I going? No, not Tuapse. I've lost it. Anyway, the other one, the Rodynske, I thought, it's probably before here. Melitopol. Anyway, the other one, the old depot that I'm gonna have to go back to here, aren't I? Rivenki, that's in Luhansk. That sounds like the Rabinsky. Rivenki, Rabinsk. No, I don't know. I don't know. It is because there's so many different transliterations of these words, but it's the Rivenki oil depot in. So that is in Luhansk. So we go to here. No, that's not. So it definitely is a different one. So then you've got another oil depot in Luhansk. So that's what Magyar's birds did. So actually, this isn't quite accurate. So Ukraine hit 2 Russian oil sites. Actually, they hit 3 Russian oil sites last night. One in Luhansk, one in Yaroslavl, and one down in what looks like Krasnodar there. So really good news for Ukraine there. Just seeing if there's any news about the strikes. No, we've already seen that. No, I don't think there is at the moment. But there could be more strikes taking place today if there are indeed missiles already in the air. So anyway, moving on to our final section here because I've been talking for way too long. Okay. Jay and Kiev starts us off on the other bits and pieces section with, in fact, before I go there, let's just make sure you guys are all right. And I want to say a big thank you to, where did we get to? To Zeb Carter, always a strong supporter of the channel. Thanks, Zeb, for gifting the 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships, as is Richard Bennett. Hey, mate, from my West Sussex man. Thank you for being on board. And who's popping? That's the quote from Robert Magyar this morning. I didn't say it because it's rude. Oil your solve. But yeah, so that's, he has a way with words, doesn't he, Robert Brovdy? Thank you to Sebs as well. Seb726 says, Happy New Year. Wes O'Donnell's latest video says UK's brake stop has passed testing. Yes, so that's a good video, well worth watching. So they had a couple of weeks back, I reported this myself, actually, before Wes O'Donnell. No, Wes O'Donnell does really good videos. I've got a lot of time for him. And he's showed a lot of really pro-British stuff recently, like how much Britain is doing to support Ukraine with lots of weaponry, whether it be like the Dragonfire laser or the brake stop and all sorts of things like the AS-90s. He did a video on them as well. And he did a video on the Terrorhawk and I think the Graveheart as well. So he's done loads of really good videos that you should check out. But Wes O'Donnell's latest video says UK's brake stop has passed testing, built by 17 companies for Ukraine kinetic sanctions. I think he had it down as costing £400,000 or dollars or euros. I don't know. Whereas a Storm Shadow costs 2.2 million. So that, you can have, what is that? 5.5 of those brake stops for every Storm Shadow. Well, that sounds pretty bloody good to me. I think 680 kilometer range on them. But thanks, Sebs. John Harold Stevenson says, thank you for your Norwegian love there. Thank you for the super sticker. Really appreciate it. John Harold Stevenson or John Harold Evenson. Good man. Julian Rossiter, thanks for being a part of this as well, mate. Gifting some ATP Geopolitics memberships. Appreciate that. Thanks to all of you. Right, let's get back to the other bits and pieces. Right. To start with Finland. So we hear today that Finnish authorities caught the Russians cutting another undersea communications cable this morning. The ship has already been detained. HS information, the vessel suspected of cable damage is Fitberg. The vessel is in the possession of the authorities of Pokala. In fact, we had Alexander Stubb, the Finnish president. He's a president, isn't he? Finnish authorities, he said, have inspected a vessel suspected of causing cable damage in the Gulf of Finland. Thank you for your efficient work and communication. And he thanks all the government officials and whatnot. We are monitoring the situation in close cooperation with the government. Finland is prepared for security challenges of various kinds, and we respond to them as necessary. Excellent. That's what we want. Really robust reaction to these ne'er-do-wells doing their stuff in the Baltic Sea and whatnot. Now, Russia's pipeline gas exports to Europe have collapsed to just 18 billion cubic meters in 2025. So let's remember, I try and always think, well, I am always thinking in terms of the pressure cookers. So we've talked about personnel issues for the Russians, recruitment issues, and attrition. Both sides of the coin there. They can't get enough people and they're losing too many people. That seems to be going well for the Ukrainians against the Russians. They're also losing a lot of materiel and these near-air strikes. So actually, it's not just raw people, but ability to conduct the war effectively, air defense systems, material in general, FPV drones and bomber drones and all that. So material, manpower, warfighting capabilities, and the economy. Obviously, your two main components of fighting a war, right? And Russia is struggling in both. And so now we're moving on to the economic pressures on Russia. So Russia's pipeline gas exports to Europe have collapsed to just 18 billion cubic meters. Sounds a lot, but it's not in comparison to what they were exporting in 2025. So the lowest level in nearly 50 years, according to Reuters. This is a 44% drop from last year and far below the 175 plus billion cubic meter peak of 2018 to 2019. Soviet-era infrastructure is now barely functioning as a Kremlin revenue source, says no reports here. Russia's pipeline gas exports to Europe fall by 44%. And I'm sure they would have been falling the year before as well. So that's a compound percentage. Well, there will be a compound percentage you can derive from that. So that is 44% from last year. And I assume last year would have been a drop on the year before. Not 100% sure, but I would have thought so. Savchenko Volodymyr says the oil production of some Russian oil companies has become unprofitable due to the discounts they offer to buyers in India and China, according to Reuters. According to Argus, last week, the price of Russian Urals oil grade fell to $33 to $34 in the ports of the Baltic and the Black Sea, the lowest level since the pandemic. And its discount to the Brent benchmark reached $27 a barrel. So $27 a barrel cheaper than Brent crude. So you might think everyone's going to be snapping this up, but if they are buying it at that rate, the Russians are not making, they're making a loss on it. So some batches of Chinese refineries were sold at were sold at a discount of 35. A discount of that's not at $35 a barrel. That's at a discount of $35 per barrel, which is effectively half price. As a result, the oil industry is on the verge of profitability. So it's on the verge of not making any money at all. Not just making less profit, but making a loss. Wow. And then if you start making it at a loss, then that's costing you every day. And a number of oil projects have already gone into the red, including due to the complexity of extraction. This is your pressure cooker. This is such a key point here. If you want to be happy about where Ukraine is at the moment, this is another example of where you should be happy. Russian economic collapse, says Maria Drutska. The Russian central bank is asking that banks accept very risky loans from troubled companies to avoid immediate massive bankruptcies. They've also waived the requirement to have reserves to cover these loans when they default. Big bada boom coming. And she's referencing Robert Brovdi there in his language. Bada boom, when he does his videos and he's talking you through drone explosions. Bada boom. Bada boom. He has his cadence, doesn't he? Love listening to a bit of Robert Brovdi. Right, more. I thought all of these had rendered. They seem apparently not to have rendered again. I've just got too much stuff open. So I'm just going to bring myself back onto the main screen and I'm going to re-render all of these tabs for your benefit. Okay, let's get back to the economic woes of Russia. Moving on, for nearly 4 years, says Anton Gerashenko, many have been saying that the Russian economy is about to collapse under the pressure of Western sanctions and the war, yet it has continued to function. And here we have some pretty graphs that I showed you yesterday. I don't really know what they show. Anyway, I'm more interested in the content here. Alexander Kolyander, a research fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis at CEPA, notes that economic growth fueled by massive spending on the defense sector has virtually come to a halt. So economic growth and spending in defense has come to a halt. Russia's Federal State Statistics Service is now publishing figures that are far from reassuring for the Kremlin. Remember, if these are official figures, the likelihood is that actually it's worse than this, right? So this is as good as it can be. And in November, industrial output turned negative. Across the economy as a whole, production fell by 0.7% on year, while manufacturing, for the first time since February 2023, slipped into contraction, down 1%. Adjusted for seasonal factors, output shrank by 2.5% month on month, pointing not to a one-off disruption, but to the start of a sustained cooling. Formally, industrial production for January to November still shows resilience, posting growth of 0.8%, but this growth is driven by a narrow set of sectors and increasingly fails to reflect the economy's real condition. Civilian industries slide into recession. A 0.7% increase in mining output masks a deep downturn inside the raw materials sector. For the first time in 15 years, food production declined, the drop in accelerating from 0.2% in October to 0.8% in November. Wood processing fell sharply, 9.1% down, as did the chemical industry, 1.7% down, furniture manufacturing, 7.5% down, and clothing production, 2.4% down. In machinery and equipment, the situation is close to collapse. Output of tractors plunged by 61.6%, bulldozers by 53.7%, elevators by 37.2%, and passenger car rail cars by half. The automotive industry has reverted to its lowest levels of 2022, recording a 34.1% decline. According to estimates by experts at the Center for Macroeconomic Analysis and Short-Term Forecasting, civilian industries have cut output by nearly 5% since the start of the year, while virtually all the growth reported by Rosstat has come from the military-industrial complex and mining, guns or butter. Even the defense sector, which has been operating in an overheated mode, is beginning to lose momentum. Output of fabricated metal products, the category Rosstat uses to classify military goods, fell by 1.6% in November. A year earlier, this segment had been growing by more than 30%. Production of other transport equipment, including tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, slowed from 41% growth in October to just 6.4%. Elena Rybakova, an economist at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, notes that for the first time since the war began, the Kremlin is facing a real choice between guns and butter. The economy is no longer capable of sustaining growth in both the defense sector and the civilian economy at the same time. And it's not a temporary downturn. Olga Balenkaya, an economist at the investment company Finam, links the slowdown to tight monetary policy, labor shortages, declining exports, and a strong ruble. In an article for The Spectator, Alexander Kolyandir emphasizes that the current stagnation is structural rather than cyclical. In his words, oil revenues in recent years have been directed not toward investment and productivity growth, but toward missiles and tanks that will be burned in Ukraine. This has created a two-tier economy, the defense sector and everything else, where civilian industry is being squeezed by high interest rates and rising costs. And then finally, darker clouds ahead. The Russian government has already cut its GDP growth forecast for 2025 to 1%. The World Bank expects at least 3 years of stagnation for Russia, while economists Alexashenko, Inozmentsev, and Nekrasov predict stagnation lasting until the mid-2030s. Yanis Kluger, an economist at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, well worth following on Twitter, by the way, that guy, notes that most of the factors that supported the economy in the first years of the war, high commodity prices and consumer boom, have already disappeared. As a result, Russia is now at its weakest economic position since the start of the war. Russia's economy is entering a phase in which the old growth model no longer works, and compensating for this through military orders is becoming increasingly difficult. Euroneum Press reports that shadow fleet oil money matters more to Moscow than provoking NATO right now. This is an interesting observation from Estonia's intelligence chief, who told the ERR that Russia subordinates other interests, including sabotage, to keeping Baltic shipping lanes open for its sanction-evading tankers. We heard yesterday that, and I can't remember who it was that stated this, but there have been far fewer examples of the Russians provoking NATO in the Baltic states since NATO has been robust in its response. And it appears that the Russians have prioritized not pissing off people in the local neighborhood as being, really, really important, because the most important thing is that their shadow fleet is able to deliver hydrocarbons to the outside world. So they are stopping doing annoying things to neighbors, because it makes it more likely that neighbors will stop their ships and stuff like that. And the idea is that sabotage is less frequent, and they really intend to keep Baltic shipping lanes open for these sanction evading tankers. Now, the EU has planned to adopt the 20th package of sanctions against Russia by the anniversary of its invasion of Ukraine, so by February 2026. But of course, they are adding to existing sanctions packages by adding ships continually now. So that's something they appear to be doing, which is good, not waiting to announce a whole package to then include a bunch more ships on it, but just continually adding them. Travel restrictions and asset freezes in the EU of other individuals and organizations are planned. Those responsible for the deportation and ideological re-education of children are also on the list. Now, Zelensky has said the first documents on the peace plan will be ready for signing as early as January. The recovery plan, he says, applies to all of Ukraine. We are preparing several documents. We call this package the prosperity package, restoring jobs. We have paid a lot of attention to this with Trump. Obviously, prosperity for Trump is a big thing. Trump, according to Zelensky, is interested in creating conditions for American business to enter the Ukrainian market, which is expected to contribute to a threefold increase in wages. Now, they do need to increase their wages. This is why they are struggling to keep people from going into Europe, because Europe has much higher wages, and so it's much more attractive for their young. So they do need to deal with that, but it seems to be all about American businesses, doesn't it? Now, Zelensky says, I've decided on the new head of the office for the president. I will announce the details a little later. The US will provide legally binding guarantees analogous to Article 5 of the NATO Charter. And we're also talking about bilateral security guarantees with other countries. There are lots of conversations going on. And he says about the office of the president, he's considered not reviving, actually, that in the format that it functioned under Yermak, but changing it to some degree. According to Ukrainska Pravda, the presidential office is considering delegating some of the office of the president's powers to the National Security and Defense Council. We actually have an idea of who it is going to be. Who is it? Is it the guy in charge of like sanctions and whatnot, Yazlyuk, who might be his guy? Anyway, New York Times reports, right, okay, so this is where we now get on to, I know you might say Trump derangement syndrome or whatever. Of course, you won't be justified in saying so, because all of my criticisms of Trump appear to be absolutely on the money, if you don't mind me saying so myself. It's got worse the last 12 hours. It looks like there really isn't much appetite for supporting Ukraine in the Trump administration whatsoever. So New York Times has brought out this article that looks inside the unraveling of support for Ukraine. New York Times reports, and this is a quote from Trump to his aides, they look invincible, and they being Moscow. They look invincible, Trump told aides in May after seeing footage of a military parade in Moscow. So, I keep saying this tells you everything you need to know about. That phrase applies here. Like, if you just want an idea of what Trump thinks about, I don't know, everything, Trump seeing a military parade in Moscow, they look invincible, tells you that, one, he likes dictators that have these big military parades. Two, when you have a big military parade like that, it makes that nation look to Donald Trump like they are invincible, to the point where he goes and speaks to aides and say they look invincible. Which, three, leads us on to thinking that Trump thinks that Russia is invincible, and therefore he thinks the Russia's going to win and Ukraine are going to lose, and he only backs winners. So that is partly why he's backing Russia. He's a sucker. He's a sucker for this ridiculous stuff, like a military parade. 3 weeks later, Ukraine mounted an audacious covert drone operation inside Russia. Zelensky sent aides to the White House with message, "What we are not losing, we are winning." So Zelensky then said, screw you guys, look what we can achieve. That doesn't look like they are invincible. Now, Trump considered Russia strong and invincible, but did nothing, even threatening sanctions against Ukraine, that is. The only person who disputed this was Special Envoy Keith Kellogg. So remember, Keith Kellogg's been sidelined to the point where he's now resigned from his position as the envoy to Ukraine. Well, it turns out that I think he was pushed by Trump because Trump called him an idiot. The only person who disputed Trump's opinion on Russia and Ukraine was Keith Kellogg, Special Envoy Keith Kellogg, who supported Ukraine and called the war existential, according to the New York Times. Trump called Kellogg an idiot, replacing him with Witkoff. New York Times says, when Kellogg visited the Oval Office soon after Trump pounced, quote, so you call Zelensky embattled and courageous? So this is Keith Kellogg had called Zelensky correctly embattled, he is, and courageous, he is. Would you, Trump, have stayed in Kiev at the beginning of the war and said, we want guns, not taxis or whatever? Would you have done that, Trump? So yeah, he was courageous and he remains courageous. Would you go to Pokrovsk? Would you go to Kupiansk and stand just hundreds of meters from the grey zone? I don't think he would, Trump. But he couldn't handle Kellogg calling Zelensky embattled and courageous. He is, said Kellogg. It's an existential fight on Ukrainian soil for his nation's survival. When was the last time an American president faced that? Lincoln? Trump grumbled, he's an idiot. As in, Kellogg is an idiot. Recounting the episode later to his other advisors, Mr. Trump grumbled, he's an idiot. Trump doesn't like Zelensky. Trump doesn't like Ukraine. Trump doesn't like anyone who corrects him and doesn't like anyone who appears to support Ukraine. Anne Applebaum quotes from the New York Times article, they believed Ukraine was on the verge of failing. The fact that empirical evidence indicated the opposite didn't bother them. If anything, they seemed to think they should help Ukraine fail faster to get it over with. If there's a sentence that you are going to remember today that sums up Trump, this tells you everything you need to know about Trump. It's this one. Another one. The Trump administration believed Ukraine was on the verge of failing. The fact that empirical evidence indicated the opposite didn't bother them. If anything, they seem to think they should help Ukraine fail. What do you mean that we want them to be failing? What are you doing giving us evidence that they're not failing? In that case, we need to help them fail faster. We need to get this over with so that we can get into bed with Russia. Again, if you are a viewer who's still supportive of Donald Trump, I don't know how you are function rationally speaking. How do you generate conclusions with a rational basis if you think that Trump has Ukraine's best interests at heart? You're not justified in that conclusion. I'd love someone like Andy S to come back on, someone that used to watch my stuff, but he was so supportive of Trump. He was supportive of Ukraine, but like Trump was the be all and end all. I'll call him out a bunch of times, and I presume he doesn't watch anymore. I'd love to know what he genuinely thinks of Donald Trump, given all of this evidence. Here, how many Ukrainians died because Pete Hegseth ignored orders from real Donald Trump? So sometimes Donald Trump actually asked Hegseth to do something half decent, and Hegseth, well, the last time I checked, our policy was to support Ukraine, a senior US military officer said. Quote, the president said to restart shipments, and these people at the Pentagon were preventing that from happening, creating a de facto anti-Ukraine policy by dragging their feet, putting sticks in the spokes, and slow rolling support in these nasty little ways. Wow. We're supposed to be pro-Ukraine, and yet you, Pete Hegseth, and probably actually really the cheese, Elbridge Colby, trying to prevent Ukraine from being able to receive American weaponry. Near Pokrovsk, a commander who goes by the name Alex was rationing 155 mil shells. With 200 a day, his men could attack only 5 of the 50 targets spotted by reconnaissance drones. It's not enough to hold the line, he explained. This is at a time when Ukraine were really desperate and the US stopped supplying them with weaponry. And you're like, come on, guys. So you've got Trump, you've got Vance, you've got Colby, possibly even Hegseth, acting against the best interests of Ukraine. Ukraine is fighting against Russia, and now it appears the United States. And get a load of this. If you were unsure then, how about this? So a big headline has just come out. Iran's been sanctioned by the US. They've sanctioned Iran. But in the quiet, small print at the bottom, we hear that for those who are careful readers, we understand that there's been a Russia-linked delisting. So the Treasury's 30th of December release bragged about new Iran measures, says the Euromaidan press, yet it also quietly delisted ex-Sberbank executive Alexandra Buryko. No big press release, no explanations, just deletions. So the Trump administration is relieving sanctions on Russians while putting heavier sanctions on Iran, but not telling us really very carefully or very clearly when they have delisted these Russian sanctions. And then if you were in any doubt about things, I'm going to play you this. I'm going to play you this audio. And I don't know why I don't have my nice Ukraine background. There we go. I'm going to play you this audio because I think you need to listen to this. This is the US officially congratulating Russia on the new year.
Дорогие друзья, с наступающим Новым годом. As the new year arrives, I extend sincere greetings to you and your families on behalf of the American people. The spirit of this season invites reflection, renewal, and hope. It is a time when people everywhere pause to consider not only where they have been, but where they wish to go. The past years have brought hardship, loss, and division. Yet history reminds us that conflict does not define the future unless we allow it to. The turning of the new year offers a chance to move forward, to seek peace as a mutual responsibility and a mutual benefit. President Donald J. Trump has consistently emphasized the importance of ending the Russia-Ukraine war. His administration has worked diligently to encourage dialogue and action, seeking a path towards peace that respects the sovereignty of nations while prioritizing safety and stability of the region. His efforts have laid the groundwork for continued engagement and negotiations, and his commitment to diplomacy remains a beacon of hope for both our nations. Americans and Russians share deep traditions of resilience, creativity, and love for their homelands. These common threads can serve as a foundation for building a more peaceful future. Желаю здоровья, мира и благополучия в новом году.
So I really struggled not to punch my computer screen full in the face there. I mean, holy crapola. So as someone says, and it's a good point, why not that message? Why not a lovely message? I mean, maybe the embassy to Finland has released such a message. That's the American embassy to Moscow. And that's sickening. Absolutely sickening. So if you're wondering, you know, what side the American administration is on at the moment, it's on the Russian side. It's 100% on the Russian side. Unless you present to me considerable evidence to the contrary. I guess some good news though. Maybe where that guy is, part of the Domodedovo, I've been there, near Moscow, is in a blackout. So this is now kind of getting more central. They are reporting an accident. Yesterday, there was an unmanned danger there all day. Yeah, let's hope that Ukraine has given energy sanctions to the Russians rather directly there. And we here, this is another one. European countries are considering, according to Die Welt, deploying up to 15,000 troops in Ukraine within 6 months after the end of the war to monitor a ceasefire as part of the coalition of willing. Leaders in France and Britain ready to provide ground forces for security guarantees even without UN or EU mandates at the invitation of Ukraine. Portugal and other states are also mentioned, monitoring from the air and sea, neighboring countries, the Black Sea and Turkey. Yeah, so there you go. I'm going to have to finish it there, aren't I? Because otherwise I'll just keep on talking, and I do need to go and give my family some love and attention. So let's just get back then to you guys. Thank you very much for watching this very, very long hits and losses video. I said there was an awful lot of information, but hopefully it was of use for you guys. Thank you for all of you supporters in the live chat in terms of support for the channel, keeping the lights on. Thank you very much to the mods in the chat. Thank you very much to the people who support me, people like Michael Winkler, really kind in super chats on Buy Me a Coffee, and you know, Mark and Olena and Mark Bisky, that is, all sorts of people, Marcus Leboschka, Curtis Engel, Hoagie. I could mention so many people. Thank you, and I probably will do that more formally. But thank you for helping me in all the ways, PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee. So thanks for supporting me. But most of all, thank you for supporting Ukraine this year, and may your support continue into next year. Which then brings me to, I guess, the final thing of atpgeo.com/donate. That should bring you to the Car for Ukraine donation page for our fundraiser, which is almost at 10,000 spondulis. We are just a hair's breadth away from 11,000. So if you can help out with that, that would be absolutely marvelous. And thank you to the very many people who have already done so. Really do appreciate all of you. You are good people. Thank you for making this community that has emerged out of ATP Geopolitics such a wonderful place, and makes me want to come back and speak to you more and more, because you are awesome. So thank you for putting up with me for the many, many hours you do on a daily basis. I pity you. I pity your family members. But thank you. Take care to you all, and big love. Slava Ukraini.